So you call me up. Hello.
All right. Well, welcome. How are we tonight?
We're just as nice as we can be.
Just as nice as we can be. Getting ready for our nice snowstorm and oh really? See,
We're not gonna get it. It's
I
gonna
think it'll
go
be
over
a
and go to music.
All
It's
right.
gonna go right overhead and right to music.
I like the way you think.
I just talked to my daughter in Boston, when they talk about that, they go,
Nothing.
they said nothing. Yeah, she drove it and I said, no, it's just rain.
All right. Well, we'll see. I know I'd be okay with a nice snowy hot cocoa kind of afternoon and evening. So we'll see what happens. But I'll take the snow over the ice every day.
I would too, yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here with us tonight. We'll do just a tiny little recap of some of the things we talked about last week, just so we're all on the same page, and then we'll dig into God, because that was sort of the
Ending thing.
yeah, exactly, right? Our tangent sort of a little bit last week. So last week, a lot of the things that we looked at were specific biblical texts where we looked at the ways that we see that violence and what it teaches us about humanity and about a lot of our societies and the way that we interact as human beings. We also talked a little bit about some of the idea behind the bystander effect. So the more of us that are in a place, the less likely that any one of us will take responsibility and step up and say something or do something if we're uncomfortable. Because the more of us that responsibility gets spread across, the less likely we are to sort of be the trendsetter and say something. Also, sort of in that same line of thinking, we talked a little bit about crowd mentality. And how the more often we're in large groups, the more likely we are to sort of go with whatever the mood or the energy of that group is. So if we have large groups of people who are very, very excited at, we talked about, doing the wave at NMU sporting events and things like that, it's easy to sort of get wrapped up in that energy and that feeling of the moment and then behave in ways maybe you wouldn't if you were just the only person walking down the street, downtown Marquette or something like that. So just a little bit of balancing all of those things, and of course had some fun conversation. Well, fun might be the wrong word, but some interesting conversation about human nature and being surprised sometimes by the way that we do behave in certain situations, or thinking I would never say that or think that, and then being presented with a situation where we do, or we sort of even surprise ourselves, or people we think we know will surprise us, and all those pieces like that. So yes, and then when we talked sort of about where we wanted to go from there, we talked about power, we talked about violence, and so it was time to zero in on God a little bit and focus our questions and our conversations. So hopefully we can get some conversation going tonight and get all of your thoughts on a few things and have a little fun doing it as well. So the first thing I want you to think about is when you think of God, whatever that means to you, visually, what do you see? What kind of a being or something? I'm trying to not lead you in any one direction. I'm just curious, what comes to mind when you think about God?
More on aura, the kind of glow of the sunrise, the light, the whole light business.
I find it very nebulous too, it's an energy and
But as a kid, you saw the guy in the long robe with the beard. So it changes as you go.
Well, that's true, but I know. But it's hard to. I don't get an image of a face or
Like a person.
Yeah. A person. I don't. It's power.
Well, sometimes it's a very quiet and kind of nature thing. Like this is a very holy kind of place. There's really something special about here now.
Like that. Yep, that was, I didn't ultimately go through the process of the ELCA becoming a pastor, but I did start that process thinking that maybe I would. And one of the first things you do as you enter that process is meet with a candidacy committee, and they ask you what God looks like to you. And I remember, I was a senior in college, I suppose, coming out of college and going into seminary. And I was very, very sure that God was sort of a sparkly cloud, that kind of very much this like aura. That's a much better word. that's really, yeah. But right, sort of this, always connected that understanding of, sort of this being or this presence, following the Ark of Agreement and with the Hebrews in the desert and sort of all of those pieces. So yes, definitely understand the aura and that presence piece. Any other?
Yeah, I don't really have a picture either, but I think addresses that describe what God is. And so loving and powerful are true. But I have no image whatsoever at all.
That's interesting. It's kind of an attribute,
Right.
which actually I guess is an Old Testament kind of Hebrew
Right.
God. You can't
Exactly.
get your hands around it. I mean,
We're very on brand, right? Like no sort of idle focus
no need
on
for
this.
it,
We understand, right? We understand ourselves in relationship to it rather than sort of in this embodied way. Yep, absolutely.
I think there's still a feeling like God the Father, and then, that brings out other things. Okay, fathers are males, and I understand. I don't want to go too much in that direction, but yeah, there is that father-like aspect.
But, wisdom being female
Right? Yep.
and wisdom being part and spirit then with the wisdom. So you get a more
Sort of
complete.
combo. We'll talk about the Trinity a little bit, yes, too. Yep. But yeah, and it's true, right? Like we were saying with that, sort of the, old fellow with the white beard, sort of. I mean, and not to be confused with Santa, I guess. But I guess I haven't really ever said that. I'm like, yeah, not quite, not the other one with the white beard. But yeah, exactly, right? We see sort of these other media portrayals. Even if it's just, a silly cartoon strip or something that is sort of poking fun at this idea. What other than that, can you think of any other popular culture or media ways that we present to God? Hollywood loves a good
Yes,
storyline.
definitely. The zap of the lightning
Yes, yeah.
taking care of evil.
Yep, get a little connection to Zeus and our Greek and Roman gods and goddesses with our lightning bolt for sure. Yep.
There's a movie where he was portrayed as black, wasn't it?
Yep.
You don't think of George Burns then, huh?
Yep. Exactly. I can't remember. Was it The Shack? The book.
Yeah, The
I want to
Shack,
say
right.
God is a black woman.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
a black woman.
maybe,
Yeah,
in
that's
the
what I
movie, I
remember.
think.
Yeah, the shack. Yeah.
So we certainly do sort of play with that. I think it's at Dogma that God is a woman in that one. I think French woman. Don't quote me on that, but right. So we certainly Hollywood can sort of play with this a little bit, but it isn't unusual, right, that we see some of those representations. So then thinking about our own concepts and the concepts we see in pop culture and all of those places, what kinds of particulars of God do we have in the Bible?
Well, you cannot put a name on it.
Right. And you don't see him. I mean, it's like Moses comes back.
Right, we get like the burning bush.
Yeah,
and
the bush was there. He knew he was, but it was like a sign he was there, but he wasn't really the bush.
Right. Yeah.
When he went up to Mount Sinai and he was to go into the cave and cover his face and then walked by.
And the thunder. They were afraid to see God's face.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
they were.
Right.
Because I think bad things would happen, right?
Yeah.
But then there's this voice that comes like at baptism, it's like, my son.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So maybe a God that's a little more Not that the sort of scary God
You don't
isn't
see
loving,
it,
or
but you get this
right?
big
You
thundered
have this,
voice.
yep, exactly, this
There's a
connection.
little voice. They don't
Not
describe
bad.
it.
Not
It's been a
bad.
very whispering voice.
Could have been a-
Whispering.
Although you want the whole group to see it.
So we read into a lot of those things, right? Yep, absolutely.
True.
What other portrayals or what other ways do we understand God, either Old or New Testament?
Protective.
Yeah, great word.
We do hear the judgmental, but not as much as, I mean, kind of, particularly the Lutherans say, okay, but he's loving, you know?
Right, exactly. We like the both and, right? So it's like there's this and
I don't
also.
dwell on that.
Yeah,
Right.
And I think in the past, people have seen God as more acting in this world directly, less so now. I think what people don't see, well, and that's, they thought lightning must be God. They've gotten away from that, but God has been pushed out of direct action more and more.
Yep. That's a really good point, right? We give humanity more and more credit, right, for the good and the bad that we do, and God is sort of separate sometimes.
Well, we talk about that hand of God,
Mhm.
but I don't know that that's in the Bible.
Good question.
I don't
Yeah.
recall, I couldn't immediately think of a verse that was talking about it. But that's become an idiom of speech, you know what I mean? But that's an action, I think. Yeah.
That he promotes an action by someone else.
Right? Yep.
This
God's work our
happens,
hands.
it was serendipitous, and it was like, well, the hand of God was with me.
Or the idea of Luther being little Christ to one another.
Right?
Oh,
Absolutely. Even I don't know that it still is, but the VLCA sort of slogan a few years ago, God's work our hands,
Oh, yeah. there you go.
right? So yeah, very, very connected. So yeah, you caught most of them, right? A lot of, right? Some shepherd imagery, the mother hen hovering under her wings kind of piece. But yeah, certainly, right? Also that avenger or defender, depending. Yeah, yep, exactly, right? All of sort of those understandings and connections and all of those pieces, right? So, it's understandable why it's hard for us to all talk about this or think about this or have one specific version when we have so many options in the Bible, so many options in tradition, and so many ways that we can think about the person of God and how we relate to that being.
When I think about the Father, when you were reading this, the thought occurs to me that in modern society, I think in our generation already, father figures are not that strong. They were more equal. And your father, it wasn't this, you're not coming from a culture anymore that has this domineering father. And so I think that's another reason why maybe the father image has been supplanted with, could be mother, could be, it could be,
I think that's an interesting point, right? Well, I think we talk a lot about, in theological circles, for those of us who don't have positive experiences with our worldly father or mother, or whatever it might be. It's like, well, okay, if the best example of love is the fatherly love between God and Jesus, how does someone who doesn't understand that or have a really negative, right? How do we sort of reconcile that, or how do we put together these other pieces? So yeah, I think it's true. I hadn't really thought about, our society having more partnership families and marriages and those things, maybe moving us away from some of that, digging into father imagery.
That Avenger piece there, that was all in the Old Testament. I think it's in the New Testament very much. And I think it's probably, I'm thinking some sort of conservative Christian churches that's still there.
Right.
But not in the LCA.
Not much. Maybe a little bit if there's some really, traditional churches really going with that Christ as the victor over evil, and even then it's more the person of Christ as warrior. But yep, exactly. Yeah, definitely more of an Old Testament.
And if the Avenger part would be towards word people necessarily.
And you didn't put king up there, but I mean,
That's a good point.
that's another father.
That's a good one. Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
I
definitely.
know, and again, that doesn't
used
have,
a lot.
it's lost its relevance.
Right. And
Kings
especially
are bad, you know?
right, exactly. Well, and I think especially, in our context of sort of kings being tangential to our understanding of government or structures anyway,
Yeah, I
right?
know, they were,
I suppose it's possible that, someone in the UK or even Norway with a constitutional monarchy, those,
Yeah,
maybe
right.
they would or would not understand it those ways.
a benign
but,
figure, but yeah, right, but it's.
exactly, right? And then there again, right, our worldly understandings and experiences with all the people or understandings of those roles, it gets a little complicated, right? So of course, let's complicate it a little bit more.
Yeah, right.
Right? We're just gonna touch on the Trinity because that could be, its own 17-year study of all things that we probably still couldn't fully understand or try to understand, right? All of those pieces. But basically, right, we've got our three persons, our 3-in-1 of the Trinity. And I had to make sure the office was still open so we can put the computer away when we're done. So we have our 3-in-1, 3 persons of the Trinity. The easiest way to sort of spell that out and understand those, right, are our Apostles' Creed. So if we want to understand sort of our base doctrine understanding of the Trinity, we have this person of God who we understand as the creator, right? So a lot of as we've moved away from gendered language, right, we'll talk a lot about loving creator or, majestic painter of the universe or sort of some of those maybe a little bit more flowery, but at least non-gendered language options. And then that second person that we understand as Jesus Christ, right? So this is our Lord and our Savior. This is the connection to salvation. It's not that God and the Spirit aren't connected, but it's sort of Jesus's main job, right? So these are sort of there.
Are we going to be losing the word Lord because that ends up being a domination kind of thing? Would it be Savior and Redeemer?
That's, great one. Yeah, Savior and Redeemer. Yep. Yeah, really good point. Mm-hmm. And there again, right, a little bit gendered and that hierarchy.
Well, you can't really undo his gender.
Right, and there is that too. I mean, some theologians have tried and have argued that is not an important aspect, but yeah.
Yeah, it might not be important, but.
right. When you have a historical person, it's a little bit trickier to do that. And then Holy Spirit, which we already talked about, right, is sort of this idea of wisdom. A lot of the times it is female or tends to be gendered in feminine ways throughout Old and New Testament.
Especially in the Old Testament, I'm thinking of where they talk about she when they talk about wisdom.
And use, exactly.
So, and I'm thinking, this is the perfect thing for this week because of St. Patrick's Day coming.
Exactly, I know. We have like our Celtic. Yep, exactly. I know. I should have worn my Celtic Trinity necklace. I forgot. But then also, right, our Holy Spirit is sort of the mediator on our behalf, since the historical person of Christ isn't physically with us in the everyday human role at this point, right? So we have sort of this mediator sent by God the Father and Christ the Son to continue connecting us with the Trinity and connecting us with the faith and all of those pieces. Of course, there's a whole lot more you could unpack with that, and maybe in a future class or another time. but basically, right, so we're talking about our Trinity and our 3-in-1. We've got sort of that set breakdown. All right. So let us look at some stories that have God in them, and we'll talk a little bit about what version of God or what aspects of God we're seeing in some of these stories. So of course I left my copies at home. Would anyone like to read tonight? They're fairly short. All right. So we've got, I've at least got the right page for you. Should we do, let's do 1 through 16. Okay. Yes, let's do it.
Adam lived with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, you will not be accepted. Will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened his mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
Thank you. So what's our sort of, the versions of God that we see in this one?
Judgmental.
Mhm. Yep.
Because he picked one over the other. So you think, well, is that the way it is always, that one is going to be good and one is not?
I always feel a little bad for Cain too, because even in the original Hebrew, I don't know that I fully understand why what he did wasn't acceptable, right? Like I feel like we don't get quite as much backstory as I would like to understand, right? Like did he do something else with it first, where he wasn't giving the first to God?
Got the really kind of small ones that he couldn't get a good market price for.
Yep, exactly, right? So I'm just like, based on
That sort of thing. The second rate veggies.
Exactly. It's
But it doesn't fit with our vision of a loving father. Even if what he offered wasn't as good as his brothers, a loving father might just thank them both equally for their gifts.
I didn't think that it was that he didn't give, that he was judging them against each other so much as he was judging the quality from what they had. So that Cain did not give. He talked about Abel bringing some of the best fat and the whole thing, and they just said that Cain brought some stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't quite follow that, what he was saying.
It's sort of it sounds like God is fickle.
Yeah, good word. Yeah. Yep. And sort of this, I always think it's interesting, right? So we have sort of the loving and, I don't know, almost excited or thankful God for Abel's offering, right? And so we have that relationship. But then over on the other side, right, sort of this judgmental, maybe a little disciplinary, more than little, just disciplinary, right? To sort of try and see those two different relationships. And then, the question becomes, how do we, guarantee that we have the right relationship? How do we know that we're doing the right things, right, to get this positive response?
But it also seemed like in that story that the way that God comes across as testing.
Yeah.
Because he knew that Abel had killed him, but he didn't say that until Abel lied. Or until Cain lied, Right, I know. And then he kind of could. Then he showed compassion. He's like, "Oh no, I really like it." So, no, it's like, so there's a little of that.
How many people have zeroed in on the mark of Cain as being a thing to divide people away and used it in detriment, but they have not, supposedly that protected him. And in certain ways, I don't know what it was, because it never is said.
Right.
There are interpretations of.
I'll be the person that I have no idea what the story is saying at all.
Right.
Other than
Right.
there's something bad that happened here.
Right?
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
we've gone from eating an apple and
Yeah, right.
to killing someone.
Exactly.
Just
We
stepping
fall
up.
off really quickly, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We have this nice like moment of creation and we have all these really great images and all this nice stuff, and then we eat the apple and then it just really goes off track, right?
But there wasn't even an intermediate step like stealing
No.
something. No,
Right.
they went right to kill it.
Right, yeah, exactly. What a way to prove a point.
And I've heard or read somewhere that it was kind of like a justification of how people would be at war with each other.
Yeah, yep. And that was my next question. So what does a text like this show us about humanity? Right?
Well, it was a jealousy issue, because you always think that, you see, you're not favored. And sometimes there are times when you have more or less reality to that, or feeling that way. And that's kind of the way it came across in the beginning. You're not sure what, but clearly Cain felt gypped, or that Abel was favored in some way, and but that's kind of the same as Isaac too.
I was going to say that I was further on
Comes
with
back.
Isaac and
And,
Esau?
Esau, yeah. I'll try to split that up too.
Absolutely, yeah. This definitely is a theme, right? That comes back a lot through the Old Testament. Even, I mean, you might even be able to sort of connect it to our understanding of the prodigal son, but in sort of maybe a little kinder, more forgiving, like loving father kind of way, right? Who's able to, and then it's sort of the frustration of the son who stayed and working through that, but we miss the murder part, and we at least see this sort of loving father trying to navigate those very human, right? Like feeling unconnected or unfavored and all of those pieces. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you notice about God or God's response to humanity, or things that go ahead.
Vengeance, because
Yeah.
now he's after like 7 times as bad, whatever it was.
Right.
If you kill
Anybody
him.
kills,
Yeah.
if it happens again, it can. And so that's vengeful God.
Really. Right.
Yeah, but there was also that issue of giving him a second chance. I mean, because he didn't kill him. I mean, a totally vengeful God would have killed him because he killed one or two.
But prior to that, when Cain didn't Cain go to God and say, what? And God said, well, you know what you need to do it. And instead he went out and killed his brother. So he would have had the chance if it had been that he'd given sloppy veggies. It could have come and brought his best foot forward, and then maybe it all would have been, but that isn't what happened. And so,
Right. Exactly, yeah.
so before he got to the point where he is banning him and sending him out.
Maybe get like almost a third strike there by the time we're marking him and
suppose,
sending it out, right? Yep. But yeah, definitely a little bit of a contrasting piece to some of the sort of loving focus and things, especially that we'll see, right, when we get the person of Christ involved and pull some of those things in.
But this is often true in the Old Testament. There's black and white.
Yep. Exactly. Much more drastic than we're used to in a lot of ways. Other thoughts about this one?
I'm thinking of source of the writing.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, when you have the Kings and the Solomon songs, it's written from different views. The Seraphim, I can't remember the different groups of the two different kind of lines of the Jewish faith. One in which it has a whole lot more joy in it than the other. And so they look at things totally different. But this is prior to that division.
Right.
Because it's not really a Jewish community at that point.
Exactly. Yep.
So it was probably written after the Jewish communities
I
were in
suspect
place.
so,
Yeah, so it already had that imprint on it.
Have sort of that, yep, exactly. But it's true, right? I can't remember if it's right away in the first chapter, but there's this one sort of throwaway line that never comes up in the lectionary about mortal women and immortals and the time when gods walked the earth. And it's just like one line buried in that beginning part of Genesis, and we never talk about it, and and it just sort of sits there. And and we're like, okay, well, there was our bridge between our pagan societies and coming into this early Judaism, right? And sort of this
and our understanding of God.
right.
Okay, so I can take the Trinity simply because I don't understand it, and I figure there's so many things in the universe that I don't understand. So this is a way to explain, so okay.
Yep. Right, exactly. Yep. It's true. At least it's like some sort of an attempt that is, explaining the unexplainable, right? I feel like so much of faith is that, right?
Yeah, but it does indeed then put us at odds with a number of other religions who may have been related to us.
Yep, absolutely, right? That was the class I teach at Northern. We're just getting into the Roman Empire. And so we started out with ancient Greece and we've worked our way through. And so now we're starting to, they're starting to put together where we went from the Greek gods and goddesses and having, many gods and all the different temples and the things that we focus to. And then you start to see in this Roman Empire and this early Christianity and the early Christ followers and martyrs and all of these places, and you see this really strong resurgence to the one God, right? And now we're trying to sort of figure out, okay, we have all of these pagan holidays that we still sort of celebrate, but now we also recognize, the roots of Judaism and the roots of the early Christian movement, and how do we sort of make all of those things work together? And certainly we've, the Catholic Church for sure has been really, really good at that, right? As they have spread around the globe, right? To say, oh, there's this, specific holiday that is practiced by the folks in this community. What connection to, because most of it is, right? Somehow we can find those connections, or there are some overlaps. Maybe it's a festival to celebrate spring. And, we read all of the stories about how to understand the Easter egg, and that
So that, all over the earth, different groups of people, they're all looking for a creator and looking for an explanation and trying to find meaning in life and why things are the way they are.
Yep, exactly, right? And I think that's huge, right? We're all just trying to figure out why we're here and what we're supposed to do while we're here, right? How do we live out the things that we're supposed to in all of those ways?
That's the anthropological explanation.
Exactly. My dissertation advisor was an anthropologist, so. Yep. All right, so let's also look at another one. Someone else feel like reading this one? Is I think a tiny bit shorter, and it's, again, we'll do a seasonal one.
Oh.
Any takers? At least got you on the right page. I don't know where it was a little bit smaller text than I. So Luke 23, 32 to 43. I know. So I was like,
This is small.
a big one. I was like, it don't look like the biggest print over there.
2 other men, both criminals, where we're starting, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on the right, the other on the left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. People stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he's the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise."
Thank you. So how do we see God portrayed in this one? It could be God as in the aura God, or God in the person of Christ.
Yeah, well,
Kind of both
I was
ends.
just saying, you see it human.
Right. So the obvious for sure, right?
The obvious.
Most obvious thing in this is that he's very forgiving.
Yeah, and giving hope to the one who had no hope right there on the cross. They feel, okay, I'm getting what I deserved.
So merciful.
Yeah, merciful.
Well, Jesus was asking for them to be forgiven, that the Father then has the power for forgiveness.
And he's asking, it sounds like the universe,
Right, yeah, sort of.
because he
this,
doesn't
yeah.
at that point. He's not talking about the people on either side. He's talking about in somewhat the audience, which is made up of all kinds of people, including some of his followers, and then the soldiers and everybody else that's around. So
That's a great point, right? So the large picture, not just,
yeah, so I get the them as much bigger than
yeah,
just
than the two there, yep. What about humanity? What does this passage tell us or show us about humans?
no, it's a crucifixion. Let's face it.
Right? It's not great to start out with, right?
Yeah, but then there's also that human tendency to kick the dog.
Yeah.
I mean, they keep making it worse.
Yep.
Insulting and
Three loves company.
yeah, I know exactly. It's sarcastic and
And it's a circus-like kind of situation. I mean, not everybody is there celebrating. There's an awful lot of people there. Some are just curious. They've come by.
Right. But it could be a mob mentality too. I mean,
Now, the mob did not come and save him.
Right, exactly, yeah.
No, they didn't. They went and who could add the insult to insult to
Exactly, yeah.
injury worse.
It seems like people will, in a group like that, are more tolerant of torture and really awful things happening. I think they wouldn't, if it was just one person suffering like that, they might not have the same reaction. Because it's a whole group of watching.
That's a great, yeah, exactly. It's a great point. And it's also, I think, interesting. So you have coming out of ancient Greece, like the end of ancient Greece, when we start to move into Rome being the world power. That's also when we start having spectator sports, which then sort of leads us through the eras. And then in this early part, we're starting to see martyrs, and we're starting to have a lot of, energy around the spectator sport of that.
Right.
Right? So, I mean, it really was, the whole family would go out to the arena to watch, this would have been
The
after
gladiators
the Jesus
get
time. Yeah,
slaughtered.
exactly, right? to do that. Or a lot of our martyr tradition are young virgin women who won't renounce their faith and don't want to be married because they believe in Christ and they want to go and follow Christ and all of these things. And so, they're thrown into these arenas with wild animals. And it's, a Sunday at the arena where spectators are watching this and are engaged in this in the way, of this sort of like entertainment sporting event.
There's also psychic numbing.
Yeah.
Because there were so many
Absolutely.
crucifixions on what was it that
Right.
Herod did, I forget, one every 10 feet along 500, no, along
Well, it's true, like that whole stretch. Yeah.
that was from Jerusalem all the way to, I forget what city, but there was one and then another and then another.
I just read an article where a guy talked about going to the museum in Smithsonian, where they talked the Civil Rights Museum, and what struck him even more than the shackles for children were the pictures of lynchings. That they all wanted to be in the picture, and they were all smiling, and it was like,
Yeah, but it's very much like what was happening here.
that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely, yeah. If you haven't, there's this book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone, that talks a lot about that history, and there are some of those pictures in, and it's true. You have like these families with like their picnic basket and blanket under this tree where a person has been lynched, and that's just, like a normal, again, right, Sunday in the park, and we just think that this is fine.
Yeah, one of the pictures they mentioned took place in Duluth.
1920 or 21.
In Duluth.
Yeah.
It was lynching.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then the picture was there. There was a guy that was straining to get his head in the picture.
Yeah.
But also you've got the guillotine in France, of people coming and sitting there and knitting while they.
Yeah.
So it was.
Madame Defarge.
Right. They're not really a terribly peaceful people. History teaches us that.
hair. Isn't she cutting off pieces of hair, knitting them in her knitting? She was.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The head would roll by her, she'd cut off a chunk of hair.
Incorporated into the knitting.
It's going on for a long
Exactly.
time.
So humans, we learn the same lesson a lot. Or don't learn, I guess, maybe is the
Make professional football pretty tame. That's
right, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. Suddenly hockey seems like a frolic in the roses. I don't even know.
But the forgive them, and that forgiveness is for all of this stuff that we still continue, as far as I'm concerned. It's very much broader than we think
The
of.
specific, yeah, exactly. And I think it's nice too. Part of the reason I chose the Luke version, right, is that Luke generally does a pretty nice job of sort of balancing that divine and human Jesus, right? So John tends to be heavily divine, and Mark, I suppose, probably tends to be, maybe leans a little bit more heavier human, just because of the way that Mark is written. It's a little more
I think they did Mark,
story.
and Mark didn't really understand what was going on yet.
right. They're just doing the best they can.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right.
As we are.
Right, exactly. Yep. Trying our best to write these stories down because we know they're important, and we're not really sure what that means yet, but we know it's important.
Get something down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mark was
Right.
the first one,
Forget.
and so,
Yep.
interviewing the old folks before they passed.
Right.
Anything else? I think the asking for forgiveness and having that be the large scale is really, really, really poignant and really well taken. Any other sort of things that you think this text might teach us about our relationship to God or our relationship to Christ or any of those pieces?
So I wasn't there, and I still feel comforted by this statement. Because I've been there in other ways that I probably don't know.
Well, I think the classic one is all the sermons we've probably heard of the thieves on the cross. And how it isn't about what you've done. You can just make your confession and be given eternal life, so to speak. And then, is that fair? It's always that.
Right?
But that's been talked about because it's such an interesting story.
Right.
Well, it's just like
Like Cain and Abel,
the workman getting the same pay for
Yes,
1 hour.
right,
Right.
exactly.
For 1 hour. Another example.
Yeah, our reading kind of, so was it yeah, it was last week, I guess, when we talked about sort of our models of interpretation and where we are as we read the text and where the person who wrote it was, and all of those pieces. But also, right, it depends which character we identify
with,
ourselves with, right? Because certainly you can read this text and have a lot of comfort in this. Today you will be with me in paradise. But also, for those of us who, maybe think that there are certain worldly choices or actions that maybe shouldn't allow you to make it into heaven, or sort of that understanding, right? I'll just use my human judgmentalness there to illustrate a point, right? If there are certain things that we as humans find completely unacceptable,
child,
yeah, right,
sexual
exactly.
that kind of thing. It's really
Yeah,
hard.
those kinds of
We're
things, like,
supposed to forgive them, but
yeah, how do we reconcile that, right? And sort of this kind of like the Olympics of like what sin is worse than another, right? Or like what, so there's these little things that we all do, or the little mistakes that maybe don't seem really like sin or don't seem like they're that bad, and then there's things that we have as a society have decided are very extreme and are very bad, and then we're just really glad we're not the ones actually making the decision and figuring out the saving piece, right? Just be a little hands off with that and say, fine, we'll let God figure it out. But certainly, right, as humans, how do you navigate that in the world?
Yeah, I think that there might be some modeling in there for us too, that, maybe think of somebody that's done something to you that's been hurtful, and to think, okay, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't realize how the implications of what they did for you or someone that you love.
Yeah, how many of our interactions with each other are, at least on some level, miscommunications or misunderstandings of the other person's lived experience or where they're coming from in those places. Yeah. Other thoughts about this one? So can you think of other certainly there's a ton, right, of illustrations of how we understand God in the Bible, but are there any sort of particular pictures or stories that really come to mind when you think sort of about the type of God that we want to be able to connect with, or the version or aspects of God that are really comforting to you, maybe, or that you enjoy reading the most?
Daniel in the lion's den.
Yes. That's what I was thinking about. Yep.
Walking around in the fire to help them out. Hey.
Right. Yep.
All powerful. That's really good.
Right.
There's hope.
Yeah, all of our, like, here are David and Goliath and our Jonah and the whale and all of those. Yep. We need the hope, right? We need the hope that there's a reason for all of those things.
But in the New Testament, they're not really, they don't end up being heroes, or basically they don't fight.
Right. Yeah.
They don't, they don't use violence.
Right.
Pastor Andrew gave a sermon on turning the other cheek, which he put a different spin on it.
Sure.
As if that wasn't giving into it, but I'm still going back to the old way I learned it, which was basically, give me a quote, let them hit you in the face, don't react.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different message than Daniel.
Yeah.
But then, okay, we get into Revelation, and there's so much there that's kind of like,
That's a whole
I stay out of Revelation.
Right.
What do we do with
Those little
that?
winged and sort of like saw the extra heads and wings and right? Right, exactly. There's a lot. Just a lot going on, right? A lot going on. Yeah, I wonder if I had a professor in undergrad who talked about the eye for an eye, and turning the other cheek passage. And one of the things that he said was that when you hit someone with
Backhand.
yeah, exactly. So an open hand
Oh,
versus a backhand.
That's Randy.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yep. And that I can't remember. I'm going to get it wrong now. I think
Backhand is just, yeah, that's the way if you turn your other cheek, they have to hit you with an open hand.
Yeah.
And that is basically you're saying, that's like, let's fight.
To be yep. Because that's what I remember. I was going to say I was like, because one of them was like being hit as an equal.
Yes,
As opposed to
right.
being hit as a slave or like an enslaved person. Or, yeah.
Right.
So that's interesting. That's kind of fun to know. I've only ever heard that from the one professor in undergrad. So it's good to know that that was real. It was, yeah, exactly. It wasn't just something I thought I learned in college. Yeah. So yeah, it's true, right? It's sort of an interesting, and there again.
But I mean, that was sort of an exception. Everything else is more like giving me a quote.
Right.
She had two, be sure.
Yeah, so there's not much, really, there was not much fight. Turning over the tables,
And
for example, maybe,
Well,
but not much else.
and they rebuked the disciples when they came to protect them, and he cut off the ear.
Yeah, he stopped it.
And stopped them. That's
Right. So there's sort of this kind of, two sides, right? Where we have our understanding of how God and Christ react and handle humanity, but then also, right, rules for how we're supposed to handle each other and to work together, right? And all of those pieces.
Sure. They post all the sermons. You can look.
That's what I was going to say. I should go back and
check it out and find out.
find.
Yeah, find out
See
it
when
was
that
much
came up
better.
in the lectionary. Yep. Exactly.
it was a while ago.
And it
It
was.
wasn't real recent.
Got a couple
It
years
stuck
ago.
with us though.
I was gonna say, I was like, clearly it, struck a nerve. I'm sure Andrew would get a kick out of me saying, "Hey, I was just looking at your sermon from 2.5 years ago." And, like, this was good. It came up. I mean, hey, it's stuck in the brain, right?
You'll be amazed at that too.
We'll see if he remembers it, right? I think that's always the key too, right? I have sermons where I'm like, "Oh, this was my favorite sermon that you ever preached, and it was so great." And I'm like, I have no memory of saying that, but great. I'm glad it was helpful. Yeah. Oh goodness. All right. Other thoughts about God, or sort of the image or the way we wish God would interact with humanity, or any of those.
Well, we didn't get to how we wish you'd do it.
Fair. Well, let's go there. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it is pretty bold, right? We're going full Lutheran. We're sitting boldly by imposing our desire of how God would deal with us as humanity.
We'd like to not have doubt, so the writing on the hand on the wall saying, "I am here."
That would be very clear. Yeah.
That could be.
I need a rubric.
Yeah.
Like, tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do, and then we'll be fine.
I probably won't be able to do it, but
Right.
what the heck?
Well, luckily we have that second person in the Trinity.
What about the image, the story of God overturning all the tables in the temple? Okay, when he finds them desecrating it by selling things that everybody's buying.
Right.
You weren't
I
just.
mean, it's sort of like holy outrage, kind of like should we be doing that too when we see that?
They talk about, not not having sales in churches, so they use that for that. But I don't think he was upset about the fact that the sales were happening so much as that they were really cheating people.
Well, maybe
in
that's
ways
right.
too.
And that's
I'm
true
not
too,
sure
right?
the whole.
There's more of the, right, the nuances of that, right? And there again, right, it's sort of
How do you interpret it?
there's exactly, right, there's the historical
There's the
context,
money
and then
changing.
there's how we potentially misuse it in our context.
So there, I mean, we can
Banging.
do protests and those sorts of things, which are pretty, I mean, that Martin Luther King sort of stuff.
Mm.
But then there's the next step, which is, going to things like boycotts, or maybe even threatening people with power that you have. So where does the line get drawn?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's
Because I mean, that's violence. Then as soon as you start to impose something on someone else, that's a type of violence.
Right.
I mean, it's not only to kill them,
right, but like,
but when you read that article I was sent you.
I'm excited to. I'm like,
It's all about, they're worried about that.
Yeah, yep, and it makes sense, right? And there's sort of this, there's blackmail and like different levels of that, but then also, right, like a lot of, maybe not a lot, that's probably not fair, at least some, right, of the peaceful protests that start out genuinely peaceful, right? Then we're back to it. We've come full circle again, right? We come into this crowd mentality, And, one
Deteriorates.
one small something maybe that is perceived as violence, maybe even if it wasn't, meant to be. And that way maybe somebody tripped and fell and pushed a bunch of people forward. And now you have all of this energy and potential aggression in this group that just radiates outward, right?
I guess the other thing I think about the tipping over the tables, that's something, I'm not that good of a scholar, but I can't remember where that occurred in the course of his ministry.
Last week, wasn't it?
I was going to say it should be right,
It was near the
pretty
end,
much right
yeah.
before, I think, yeah. But that's a good
And
point
And isn't
too.
it only recorded?
Really
Matthew?
pissed him
I was
off.
going to say it's only one, but I wasn't going to say which one. But you're probably right.
Yeah, right.
I don't know
I
whether
just think
it- But it
it's also-
was in Matthew because that was really written toward the Jewish population. And so they were, so it had some different nuances there also.
You know, you're gonna say something. I
Yeah,
wanna hear what you
yeah.
have to say.
No, I just,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's something that was really out of character completely.
Yeah.
And we really sometimes don't think about the humanity of Jesus. And was that the humanity of him with his frustration at that point of what was happening, that I don't have much time. We got to get this done now.
Right? Yeah, that's a really good point. Yep, exactly.
And I guess that's what I think. Sometimes we make too much of that. That see, he even did that, but it's like, that was one instance out of all of his ministry where he did something like that.
Right.
So let's not make too much of this.
Yeah.
I mean, how many instances do we have of him healing people and doing that sort of thing? And we have one instance where, if you want to call it violence, where he was really frustrated and really, he certainly, he chastised the apostles, chastised people, but that's different than actual physicality.
Right.
So
So what does it say for what we did? We should resort to anything other than mild chastisement of other people?
well, I think it just says that all of us are capable of doing something
True.
like that.
Or it could have been is it that also you're the hardest judge on the people that you expect the most from, sort of like the oldest kid that's always perfect, and then they do something wrong, and whoa.
Wow.
I mean, it was Cain who was the oldest kid.
Yeah, well, that's true.
So much for that. Yeah, exactly.
So much for that. That's not my family.
But it's true, right? Yeah. I mean, there is sort
But
of.
it's the Pharisees. He was really hard on them because, he was really out to, whereas the poor person at the well came and the person was dying, then he had all kinds of mercy and sympathy, but there was no sympathy there.
Let's say that, I think that the group that we're in, we're hardest on people who get away from the norms of the group we're in, as opposed to somebody in another group that we don't really care what they think. We
Right.
care about the people we're
But you
with.
cared about him, yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
And
Exactly.
he wasn't Jew, and so he did care about it. And they were the ones that taking care of the temple.
Right.
So
We tend to be most comfortable when things are sort of in that moderate sort of middle example, right? Anytime we get any emotion really, right, that's like pushes the boundary or is outside of sort of that socially acceptable, right? It gets uncomfortable really quickly. But it's true. I always think it's interesting. So of course we have our understanding of Christ in our biblical canon that we have in the Bible. But then, right, there's also a lot of apocryphal texts that aren't included, that were written in similar contexts and similar things, and there's a variety of reasons they're not included, some of them good, some of them perhaps less good. But I think it is interesting. I think I want to say the Gospel of Thomas, but that might not be right. But there's a few passages about teenage Jesus, and sort of shows him sort of discovering his ability to do miracles. And there's this bird that he keeps, killing and bringing back to life. And
Yeah,
I want to say Thomas, but that doesn't seem like it would be right. But one of those apocryphal texts. So I think it's interesting too, right? We have sort of, I think you're absolutely right. This is one of the only places that we see really a deeply human sort of losing our temper moment in one of our canon books. And so I think it's, we have sort of all these other things that we can sort of read and we can, sort of think about, and maybe it's interesting or maybe it's, just unhelpful or all of those things. But to have, these very human reactions that we can relate to, I think is kind of helpful, right? And maybe makes us feel a little bit more connected to those human aspects. And, I think there's something to be said for being able to trust that someone knows and experiences our context, right? And being able to, have some sort of shared bodily experience, right? With the person who is supposed to be saving us and who has sort of this role as Redeemer. Maybe, maybe not.
So I kind of worry, you're talking about things out of context when different groups of people or a person picks a certain passage, and this is how everybody's supposed to be. And I think we're losing a younger generation because of that kind of fixed on certain points rather than the whole vision, or at least, as much as we can understand of that larger vision.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It's getting to know some of these NMU freshmen has been interesting because many of them have sort of in discussions shared, some personal things and some background things. And part of it is maybe my stereotypes, but for, 19-year-old students, a lot of them really have been wronged by religion and hurt by the churches they grew up in and all of these pieces. And a lot of it is sort of this, certainly, the context of whatever context they're coming from, but also this assumption that all Christians come to the text and the tradition with this is the only option, this is the only way to interpret this. And I guess I was just really lucky that I didn't come out of that. And even when, I got in trouble, I think I shared, I got in trouble a lot at confirmation for asking questions, but also, that didn't stop me. Right. So at some point, right, I found a community where I was able to ask those questions and have these conversations. But it is true. I think there's the tradition, and there's certainly, churches or branches that are very biblical literalists, and those pieces. But also I think we get a lot of stereotypes, right? That, all of Christianity is sort of painted with this same brush. And I think in a lot of cases, right, folks would probably be surprised if they came, to a mainline Protestant service and heard some of the ways that the gospel is preached and the way that we have these conversations. I don't think that we don't really get that part of our story out as much, I don't think.
But I think that is this congregation is sort of we're an outlier.
Yeah.
Even within mainstream Christianity, I think. And we don't really go those other places here either.
Right. Like.
I mean, they're careful, and we're liberal, but we're not crazy.
But then again,
So both and, right? We always come back to our both hands. Simultaneously St. Anson. Right? Yeah.
but even as an adult, I found that asking the question I sort of got, oh, it's just Judy's asking another question. So then I went to the lay school thing, and that was very good. And because there,
Could have, yep.
it was not a problem. So it was expected that you had line questions, and so did the other people who bothered to do it. And now
When you look at attitudes, like racial attitudes and all that sort of stuff, across different groups, mainstream Protestants don't show that well. It's like Jewish people, Hindus, unaffiliated, all have more welcoming attitudes than mainstream Protestants,
Right. That's true.
which is really sad.
And even just the racial makeup of our churches, right? I mean, the ELCA is so very, very white.
Mm-hmm.
We just are, right? And basically everywhere. I mean, there's certainly some exceptions to the rule, right? But in general. And then how do you deal with that? How do you try and address that? And and right, I think a lot of churches too, should we, right? So how do we, is it enough to just be able to say, no, we really are welcoming, and then live it out when the context presents itself, of course.
Well, these are,
right?
they look at their attitudes, which is different than what your makeup of your church is. And so, but if your attitudes are poor, guess what? You're not exactly going to be welcome.
Right, exactly, yeah, it's not a safe
Yeah.
space.
Right.
How do you,
The good thing though is that mainstream Protestants tend to be becoming more welcoming over years.
Sure, we have room to grow.
We have room for going the other direction.
There you go. Yes, we just have like a good margin to like fix that, right?
It's called partisanship.
That's awesome. That's fun. Good. All right. So I would love to hear, so I think where we'll sort of head next week, we'll dig in a little bit to the way we understand sin, right? And how that has changed a little bit. And then based on that, and especially on this third one, right? If we understand that sin is actions or words or choices that separate us from each other and from God, what does that mean for us, right? How do we live in the world? What does that look like if that's what our understanding is? Maybe that's not what our understanding is, but perhaps it is, or it at least gives us some ideas for where we might move if that's an understanding of sin. But also happy if there's other sort of questions or ideas or things to dig into, please feel free to share, because you guys are sort of the brave original crew that will sort of help. I feel like, I'm like, all right, well, based on this, we'll sort of know where to go in the future and what to. Pastor Andrew was like, we're just gonna like try it with this one, and we'll see what happens and see where you end up, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Sounds good.
And truly, feel free to email me cool articles or thoughts or anything, because I'm happy to have other ideas or other pieces you want to dig into and all that good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a lovely rest of your evening, and hopefully not too much shoveling or not any slipping around on ice or any of those things. Enjoy it while we can. It's the time of year for our St. Patrick's Day storm, right? So as long as we don't get that, what was it that one year, 26 inches in April?
I'm on your side. I think it's going to be right.
It was in May.
Mother's
Mother's Day storm.
But,
They're wrong.
I get rain here in my house.
Well, that's right.
Okay.
Good night now, yeah.
I will miss next week. There's a rehearsal with that plant here at the same time. Did you know that?
Right? No.
Dr. Baxter, great.
Take care.
I John, but I couldn't reach him. Oh, he didn't answer the phone. And so then I went anyway, and so then they said he wasn't here. Is that what it was? Someone told me